Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the 23 Hours Podcast. I'm your host, Gains with Girds, and today we get to discuss my experience spending 7+ hours on a Saturday in a gym with one of the greatest powerlifters of all time, arguably the greatest powerlifter of all time, Ed Coan. Now, before I was going to record this episode of the 23 Hours Podcast and broadcast it to my YouTube audience as well, I thought, am I allowed to share this information with people? Honestly, I had to ask myself that question because some of the insights, some of the lessons that I learned and the private conversations that I had with Mr. Coan were absolutely revolutionary to my journey. And I'm so excited to share it with you guys today, typically on the topics of training, okay, your fitness, whether it be strength or muscle, whatever you're pursuing, business, if you're an entrepreneur or somebody who's invested into their career, and also life. A lot of the private conversations I had with him and the conversations that I overheard him having with others were around those three topics. And I'm super excited to share. Guys, success leaves clues. If you study successful people long enough, you start to see characteristics, traits, and habits that these people have that make them the greatest at what they do. And that was one of the most exciting things for me. Spending time with Mr. Ed yesterday was just learning from somebody who is a 70 plus world record holder in one of the most credible strength sports in the history of the world, powerlifting. Ed competed in, if you guys don't know who that is, you can look him up. You'll find information very quickly. But Ed competed in drug-free federations. He competed in multiple different weight classes. He competed for a span of almost 35 years, since 1980, and was regarded as one of the strongest raw powerlifters of all time. Ed personally has set 70 plus world records. That's not easy to do. He's still, to this day, some of those records still hold, even for people that are bigger than him, right? With powerlifting, if you're not familiar, there's weight classes, and usually the bigger you are, the heavier weights that you can lift. He was regarded as one of the smallest, strongest guys around, and he respected a lot of the Iron Game legends that came before him. Actually, I bring it up and I feel comfortable talking about this topic today because here's a copy of one of the first books ever published on the sport of powerlifting by Terry Todd. I was fortunate to study under Dr. Todd at the University of Texas, actually Terry Todd's wife, Janice Todd, and I learned a tremendous amount about physical culture from her and the Iron Game, and that was one of the first books ever published on this sport, and it has guys like Doug Young and Mac McDonald and Vinny Levano, some of these other OG powerlifters that really brought strength into the sports world as we know it today. So Ed Coan was on the back end of that, and set a lot of new records for that people are still trying to beat today, whether they're using gear or drugs. We're going to talk about that in today's episode or not. They're still trying to beat his records, and he was 5'6". He's a pretty short guy. I was around him yesterday at Liberation Barbell Club in Austin, Texas. I have to give them a huge shout out because they hosted him. Lori Porsche, a phenomenal gym owner of Liberation Barbell Club, invited him to come, and it was an open seminar. I bought a ticket because I wanted to go and learn from a legend. I'm not a powerlifter myself. I've never competed in powerlifting, but I do train heavy. I train all different types of ways in order to build my best physique. And you guys know that on this podcast, I constantly preach the importance of strength adaptations for muscle gains. For maximal muscle gains, for you guys to reach your true genetic potential. And a lot of those questions that I had and the stuff that I preach on this podcast and in my blog and my YouTube and the programs that I sell, I had questions for him in regards to some of the conflicting ideas in our industry. And he was able to cut through that with like a butter knife, like with the simple answers that I wanted to share with you guys today. So without further ado, you guys, Ed Coan started his career in 1980. Okay, his first powerlifting meet at 16 years old, and his numbers, okay, he's from Southside Chicago. His numbers far exceed at 16 years old what mine are now, and probably some of yours as well. He was genetically gifted without a doubt, but he was also an extremely hard worker. And I talked to him about genetics, and I asked him about training, and I asked him about his history and his life and what businesses he's involved with now and what life looks like as a champion whenever you're done competing in sport. And it was just incredible. I mean, at lunch, to give you guys perspective, he sat across from me at lunch for over an hour, and we were able to have a conversation with just a few other people at the table. And I was able to just fire questions at him, and I can't wait to share them with you guys today. So by 1984, like I said, he started in 1980. By 1984, he was a world record holder, okay, in multiple different things. But he had one of the highest totals still ever recorded in powerlifting today, a 2,400 pound total, over 2,400 pounds raw. Okay, that was a squat over 900 pounds, a deadlift over 900 pounds or 800 pounds, and a bench over 500 pounds. Okay, and obviously with powerlifting, you guys got to understand nowadays there's different federations. Some are drug free, some aren't. The 1984 was actually his first international powerlifting championship that was drug tested. Nowadays, there's a lot more gear involved. There's a lot of different barbells that they use for the deadlift, for instance. There's very, very advanced multi-ply suits that people wear to bench a lot more weight that helps them. Supportive gear is what they call it. And then there's also gear is a term used to say drug use, if they're taking anabolic steroids or any other substances that help them maximize their gains in strength and muscle mass. That's another term that I'll loosely use throughout this episode today, because those were a lot of the questions I asked him. But Ed, like I said, in the 80s, they didn't have a lot of the supportive gear and steroids that they have today. So that he's still known as one of the strongest dudes to ever walk the earth, right? Because he wasn't using, he stiff bar pulled 900 pounds raw. Okay, nowadays they have bars that will bend. Okay, they have a lot more flex in them, and they're longer and they're thinner, so they're easier to grip. Those bars allow you to bend the bar before the weights ever leave the ground, meaning you're pulling higher up on your shin, doing less work, right? So it's easier to pull more weight, like the Eddie Halls of today, or the Hathor Johnsons, Thor. These guys, they use the deadlift bar, and they deadlift well over 1,000 pounds. Whatever, I think recently in 2019 or 2020, Hathor pulled 1,100 pounds, right? But he was using a bend bar with supportive gear that Ed Coan didn't have back then when he was pulling 900 pounds at 220 pounds body weight, right? So these guys are oftentimes over 300 pounds. So you can see whatever this guy has to say, Ed, is very valuable information. How he trained, how he slept, how he recovered, and a lot of the principles that I was able to talk to him about, right? Like I would ask him, hey, how frequently did you train? Did you train at high intensity all the time? Did you allow variation with your training whenever you were preparing for a competition, or did you do a linear periodization? He answered all of these questions. And more importantly, in some of the questions that other people at the seminar would ask him, he had simple answers for, but he was always mentioning a lot of the stuff that I preached in the Fit RSVP framework. Okay, the 7 secrets to muscle gains: frequency, intensity, tempo, recovery, exercise selection. We talked a lot about exercise selection, volume. He mentioned a ton about volume in his responses to people, and progression, how he would progress his weights, his exercise selection, his volume over time in order to continuously improve over a 30-year career in the sport. In 2002, to give you guys a perspective of this guy's mindset, we talked a lot about mindset. He tore his ACL on a 900-pound squat attempt, okay? At a meet, I believe, here in the States, he tore his ACL with the bar on his back as he was descending down with 900 pounds, okay? He tore his ACL. The bar fell off his back. He fell onto the platform. He was in agonizing pain. You can see it in the video if you search it. And guess what he told the people? He said, get me off the platform so that others can lift. He was more concerned about others getting their meat in and getting their time on the platform than for that everybody to be focused on him and his knee injury. This is just, you can see it in the way that when I interacted with him and had conversations, he's such a personable guy. And a lot of champions, as you guys know, a lot of world record holders, a lot of people that are at the top of their sport or their industry are typically not that way. And he was super down to earth, super personable, and a great human being. And I was fortunate to spend some time with him. So let's jump into what he shared with me, guys. Obviously, you guys know that a little bit about Ed now. And one of the things that I love that he said to me was, you can be or look like anybody you want to be. Because that's one of the first questions I asked him. Is I was like, hey, for instance, I was like, hey, Ed, do you know Mike O'Hearn? A physique freak, right? Who's 51 years old right now. He lives in California. And Ed was like, yeah, I know Mike. I talk to Mike all the time. And he, at lunch, this was right after lunch when I asked him this question, he was like, actually, when you and I were talking at lunch, he sent me a text and he showed me his phone And he had just had a text message thread with Mike O'Hearn going on, and Mike had texted Ed at lunch, sending him a picture of his kid or something. Like, that's how close they were. And I started asking him questions about Mike, because Mike is obviously in the physique industry. He's also super freaking strong, by the way. And I started asking him, what do you know about Mike's training? Like, can I look like Mike? And he's like, Tyler, you can look like anything you want to look like if you're willing to put the work in. And that's what I loved about Ed, is that he was some of the success traits that I share on this podcast with other people that I've studied, Ed exemplified that in person. And it was just incredible to have that internal validation from somebody who's at the top of their game and has been at the top of their game for a long time, share the same habits that other people have used to be successful in business and be successful in life. So, surprisingly enough, the mindset stuff, people would ask him a question, right? At the end of the seminar, we did the bench, squat, and the deadlift, obviously at a powerlifting workshop, and he helped all of us with our lifts. And yesterday, I was actually able to hit 2 PRs on my squat and my bench. I was not able to hit a PR on my deadlift by the end of the day because we had been doing different movement patterns all day and I was gassed. But a lot of people were hitting PRs the entire day. And he was just providing simple coaching cues, right? Stuff that was so simplified that I was like, whoa, this guy's like, he's a Jedi or something. He would like touch the bar a certain way and somebody would be like, boom, PR. Or he'd give this cue and be like, move your hips this way just a little bit, focus on this. And people would be like, boom, and they'd hit a PR. And, a lot of the stuff that he mentioned is a lot of the stuff that I preach on this YouTube channel and on this podcast is like biomechanics, okay, and joint positioning is different for everybody. So for somebody to tell you that there's a right way or a wrong way to do something, it's just false. That's a dogmatic approach and it doesn't work. And Ed would just preach that the entire day, is that you got to lift like you want to lift and know how to lift. Don't let anybody else tell you it needs to be done a certain way, because you know your body better than anybody else. And he mentioned how over the years, people have broken world records in the powerlifting community using different positioning, using closed grip, wide grips, and it all comes down to whatever's comfortable for you, right? So I just wanted to share that with y'all, because you're probably looking for some wisdom-based answer that Ed gave me with all my advanced questions, and he simplified it. He said, are you making gains? Yeah, I'm making gains. He's like, well, keep doing what you're doing. Don't even listen to people like me. If I tell you to do something different, I'm a bad coach. You're making gains. You're seeing results. Keep doing what you're doing and continue to evolve and continue to grow and improve. And I loved that, because that was the basis of any answer he shared, no matter what question somebody asked. And I was able to watch him float around the room and provide insight to people that was unique to their specific bodies, but at the same time, always underlying the same principles that I discuss in my Fit RSVP framework, right? How, frequency wise, well, you're training 2 hours a day, twice a day. So you're doing 2 1-hour sessions a day. How long have you been doing that? And the person would be like, oh, I've been doing that for like 6 months. Are you seeing gains? And they're like, yeah. I was like, well, then keep doing it. Like, there's no reason to change, right? And I loved that about him, because it was a humble approach with somebody as much expertise and experience as him. Such a humble approach. You'd expect him to be like, no, that's wrong. You need to do it this way, like so many others will do in our industry. And Ed's not that way, and I respect him so much for that. So I want to get into what I asked him about training specifically, and then I want to talk to you guys about drugs. Drug usage in the industry that I was able to ask him a lot about, and longevity. I mentioned a lot about longevity and some of the stuff that I preach. What was Ed's answer to some of the stuff that I asked him? Well, starting with training, number one, I would say, hey, so I'm that guy, okay, just so y'all know, I'm that guy at the seminar or the workshop, or even in the classroom back when I was in formal education, who would ask a ton of questions. I'm the guy in the back of the room that's like, hey, what about this? Like, I read this. What do you think about that? And the teacher would be like, oh, well, this, and you can do that by doing this. And then I'd be like, well, why would you do that? And the teacher would be like, well, because that's the best way to do this. And then I would be like, well, why would you? And you see what I mean? Like, I would keep going down that route. So I'm that annoying guy, just so y'all know. And I apologize if you guys have ever been in a room with me when there's an expert, because I am just trying to I'm like a sucker fish. I'm trying to get as much data and knowledge out of that person as I can. But one of the things that I asked him about training is I was like, hey, Ed, what is your favorite supportive exercises for getting a bigger bench, right? How do I get a bigger bench? I want a bigger bench. Bench is cool. And he's like, bench more. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, bench more. Okay, what about like what exercises can I do to build up my bench? And he's like, oh, you know what? Actually, you know what? My favorite exercise, he's so personable. He's like, my favorite exercise that I would do is like my legs lifted, close grip bench press to make my bench harder. And anything that I would do to make my training harder, that I would do in my training to make that movement harder, I would make gains because my body had to adapt and then I could bench more. And I was like, God, that's so simple. That's so freaking simple. And I was like, what else? He was like, well, I really like a closed grip overhead press, standing overhead press, and a seated military press with a barbell behind the back. I felt like that grew my triceps a lot and made my bench press super strong because my anterior delt and triceps, the two supporting muscles, other primary movers to the bench other than the pecs, saw a lot of growth. And I'm like, God, that's so simple. I'm going to start doing that. I didn't think about that, right? And that's some of the stuff that he used. And then with his squat, I was like, hey, Ed, what are your favorite supportive exercises for the squat? And he was like, well, that depends. I'm a hip and hamstring dominant guy. My hips always are super, super strong and they lead the movement. So what I would do is I would do a high bar, closed stance, Olympic bar squat in the off season to bring up my quads because that was my weakness. And this was a huge takeaway I want y'all to understand. He always mentioned that there's and he did this when somebody asked him this question specifically. Here's your weaknesses and here's your strengths. Now, if you continue to improve your strengths, you're going to do this, right? And you create a big gap between your weaknesses and your strengths. And he said in the off season, he would focus on building up his weaknesses just as much as he would his strengths, if not less than, so that he could close that gap. Because he said the bigger that gap is, you can continue to improve your strengths, but eventually that foundation, there's such a big gap in your foundation, you're going to crumble under maximal loads. So in terms of longevity, when people ask about, hey, how do I avoid injury? He'd say you got to build a strong foundation, meaning you got to bring up those weaknesses to match your strengths or get them as close as you possibly can. You might not ever get them there, but your training is always addressing those issues, supportive exercises, corrective exercises, mobility, flexibility, these things that we discuss in terms of longevity and recovery. You have to address those so that you can bring and close that gap. And he said that when he closed the gap with his quads, got his quads stronger, his squat continued to increase because now he has strong hips, strong hamstrings, and strong quads, all the primary muscles that of the squat in his back. He said he worked his back all the time, rows, spinal erectors, in order to get a huge back so that he could support a heavy bar. And I was just thinking about this. I was like, dude, this is such simple stuff that he applied over years and years and years with consistent training that made him one of the greatest of all time. And it's the same stuff that you and I can apply, right? If you're listening to this, anybody in this audience, you truly can become one of the strongest people in the world. But more importantly, what he shared about mindset, okay, transitioning into mindset now, he said, I never focused on chasing numbers on the bar or setting records. And I was like, what? So I always focused on improving from the day before, myself. I focused on improving myself. I focused on me getting better than I was yesterday. And I was like, whoa, I figured a guy like you would have like the SMART goal written out, like a 1,000-pound squat by January 2001. No, he didn't. He focused on improving from the day before, the week before, the month before, from the last meet, from adding numbers, whether it was 2-pound, 5-pound increase. That's what he focused on. And as long as he was getting better, he knew he was doing something right. And he kept buying into that cycle. Now, I discuss a lot, if you guys follow any of my content, continuous and never-ending improvement is the only thing that you and I can control in our lives. There's tons of external circumstances that we face every day, but we have to take self-responsibility for each and every single one of us as an individual to make improvements from the day before. That's how you become a champion. That's how you become the best. You don't place excuses or blame other things that you can't control on your lack thereof. You take responsibility for yourself and you focus on you getting better, not other people. You're not looking at this guy who's squatting 900 and saying, man, how's he do that? Like, it must be genetics or he's taking drugs. No, you say, you know what? I'm squatting 500 right now and I'm going to be at 550 by the end of the year. Here's what I need to get there. And I focus on improving me. And he said he did that for years on years on years and years. And then eventually, you know what? He was setting world records. And I thought, wow, what a simple concept when it comes to mindset. Another thing he mentioned with mindset, consistency. When he would go train, he said the radio's off on his way to the gym. He knows exactly what his warm-up weights are. He knows exactly how much he's going to use for his working sets. He knows exactly what they're going to look like and how it's going to feel before it happens. So he's envisioning even his training what it's going to look like. In his competition, same thing. He'd think about it for weeks in advance. Here's the weight that I'm probably going to do. And then on the day of, he would make adjustments based off his first attempt, second attempt, etc. But more importantly, he always said he used the same approach. So if there's for your warm-up sets and you're walking up to the bar, he said, use the same approach. Treat that squat just like the squat you would treat in the competition with 900 pounds on the bar. Treat it the same. If it's 100 pounds on the bar, treat it the same. Repetition, consistency, snowflake reps, right? One of the strength and conditioning coaches that I worked with at Texas State University many years ago would always share with his athletes, snowflake reps. Make every rep look and feel the same. That's the way you're going to maximize your gains and your performance potential, is by doing things consistently. That's how the brain learns, right? There's neural pathways that get strengthened. If you read the book in my Muscle Gain Secrets ebook that I recently published this year, if you get a free copy of that and read through it, you're going to notice at the beginning of the entire book, it talks about Coan. He wrote a book. What is it? I'm blanking right now, but he wrote a phenomenal book. I have it on my shelf. Hold on. I'm going to give you guys the book, or I can just sum it up for you in literally one sentence. But essentially what it was, guys, he studied in this book. He studied the most successful athletes and people in the world, musicians, people that had physical skills. And what he noticed is that it was the repetition is the mother of all learning. You guys have heard that before. Well, it's true, right? Futsal in Brazil, it's a sport where it's a shortened soccer field, and that's the soccer that they play in Brazil on a smaller field, and it typically has boundaries that the ball bounces off of. And what that leads to is every soccer player gets more touches on the ball, meaning their foot is striking the ball more frequently in Brazil than it is that from people that play soccer in Europe and America, because we play on larger fields. They play a smaller version of soccer. That repetition of the foot striking the ball is why so many good soccer players come out of Brazil. And in this book, Coyle goes and describes and studies tons of other cultures where like good musicians come out of, and it's all about repetition. The more you practice, the better you'll play, right? And there's neural pathways, the neurons, right, that go and control your muscles from your brain, that it's like a cord and it thickens, right? It thickens. The myelin sheath, which is what surrounds those neural pathways, thickens as you get more and more reps, and it becomes like a broadband. Right? So with your Wi-Fi, if you can imagine it, if you're doing your repetitions on your bench and your squat and your deadlift the same way, or any other movement you do in the gym, every single time you do it, that broadband is going to thicken. It's like calling Time Warner Cable or Google Fiber and telling them to come up and churn your internet from a 300 megabytes per second to 1,000 megabytes per second. You're just going to be able to communicate with your muscles quicker and be able to recruit them at a higher level. You're going to be able to activate the right muscles at the right time if you do it the same way every single time. So it was a mindset thing that's like physiological, okay? And outside of that, he even said, you have to think it in your mind before you can execute it with your body. And I was like, dude, did he just say that? That's Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, right? In successful businesses, you have to believe, or in your career path, you have to believe that you can do it. Belief is a prerequisite for achievement. That's what Napoleon Hill writes in his book. You got to believe you can do it before you can achieve it. Whatever your mind can believe and conceive and act as if it's real in actuality and visualize, it will achieve, right? Think and Grow Rich, one of the highest sold personal development book of all time, is that same concept. And to hear Ed Coan say that, I was like, dude, that's a success principle. Success leaves clues. Okay, a few other mentions on the mindset game. Okay, I asked him about drugs, right? Because drugs are a huge part of that industry. There's a lot of dudes that use gear, right? And in private conversations I have with him, I asked him about steroid usage, and I asked him, hey, and he was like, no, he never really used a lot of drugs is what he told me. Okay, I don't know. I'm not going to say that he did or didn't. I don't know. And frankly, I don't care. He's a champion. But secondly, like he was saying that, he competed in a lot of drug-free federations that drug test. Okay, so he was just strong as hell. I got so much respect for him. But a lot of the other guys, we know that they're on gear and they're still not as strong as him. And he said, it doesn't matter. Drugs help, but I'll tell you what helps more than anything. Your mind and consistency in your training and sleep and eating. And I was like, whoa, that's powerful. right? Because one of my limiting beliefs has always been like, hey, I don't know if I can look like Arnold Schwarzenegger someday because I'm not going to use drugs. I don't want to use drugs. That's my personal philosophy. And that's been a limiting belief of mine for years. But to hear him say that and be like, dude, you don't need that. You can be anything you want to be as long as you believe it and put in the work. That was powerful, man. That was freaking powerful. And I just wanted to share that with you guys because that's just some of the stuff that I've learned. Now, I want to finish up with one thing. We mentioned longevity and recovery and nutrition. Now, what about joint pain? Like, you figured a guy like Ed, he's 57 now, would be walking around with a limp. He's actually had 2 hip replacements, and a lot of people in the physical culture and fitness industry will say, oh, powerlifting's bad for you. I mean, look at Ronnie Coleman. Look at Ed Coan. He had 2 hip replacements. It's genetics, okay? Ed told me his mom has had both her shoulders replaced, her hips, whatever he said to me. She has a degenerative joint disease or something like that, arthritis, whatever. He was like, it's genetics. Like, I always knew I was going to have problems with my hips. I delayed that for years by training heavy and training with the correct principles in mind. And I was like, man, that's freaking powerful. Like, you know, you hear so often like lifting heavy weights is bad for you. It deteriorates your joint capsule and you're going to break yourself down. No, Ed was like, no, you got to train, man. Use it or lose it, right? This whole philosophy of longevity. And he lifted heavy, man. He competed for years on years on years on end. And he rarely took time away from the sport. Even to this day, he's still training. And he's not addicted to opioids. He said he takes the occasional leave, but he suffers from no chronic pain or discomfort. And I was like, man, if this dude has been training and he's 57 years old, and he's not his knees don't hurt every day or his shoulders don't hurt. He's got a few torn labrums and, you know, some issues that come from overuse. And he said, no matter what sport you do, overuse injuries are going to occur, right? You can't do the same movement patterns day in and day out for 40 years under extreme loads and not see deterioration. So that's not what I'm saying. But he said, you can mitigate it and it's not as bad as people make it out to be. Like, I would rather be successful and strong and powerful and a champion than be concerned about blowing out my shoulder, right? He tore his ACL in 2002 and he was like, what, you know, he came back from that. He came back from it. He made adjustments to his training and came back and continued to improve. And it was just this whole philosophy that a lot of people will talk, okay, in our industry, and a lot of influencers will say these things. But when you actually talk to the people at the top of the game that are doing it, it's simply a fact of whatever you think and take action on, you'll see results. Okay, so the whole belief, the whole mindset thing was the number one takeaway that I had, and spending 7 hours with Ed Coan. And I hope you guys can understand that too, that you're truly capable of accomplishing whatever you want. Keep it simple. Follow the Fit RSVP framework. If you're not familiar with proper training principles, if you guys are okay, I'd love to give you guys an opportunity to go learn those. Okay? Go learn those. Go see them applied in a 10-week training program. My new advanced muscle gain program takes frequency, intensity, tempo, recovery, selection, volume, progression, and puts those principles of training, those core principles of training, into a 10-week program for you guys to develop better physiques and build a huge foundation. Okay, maybe you're not training right now. Maybe you have been training for years. Either way, I can guarantee you this program is going to help you get results because it follows that simplistic framework for a training program. Okay, now that's an opportunity for you guys to go check out right now. You can go to 23hoursprogram.com/advanced muscle gains. Okay, I'm going to link that to the description of this episode today, whether it's on YouTube or you're listening on the podcast. It'll be in the description. And understand that taking action is more important, as Ed said. Like, don't just think about this stuff and complicate it in your mind. Take action on it. And if it works for you and you're seeing results, continue doing it. Right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. He never did that. He found a way to get results early in his training career, and he doubled down on it, and he stayed consistent, and he stayed within the right mindset, and he applied the same principles that I apply to my training that I've seen success with to his own training. And he did it for years on end, and he never let anybody else tell him what he could or couldn't do. He just believed in himself and focused on continuous and never-ending improvement. So, biggest takeaway for you guys is have that belief, develop that belief in yourself. Okay, the way that you do that is you keep showing up. Okay, you keep showing up and you keep trying. Okay, not every day is going to be a great day, but you show up anyways. That's the mindset of a champion. Ed Coan exemplifies that. He is a legend, an Iron Game legend. I was fortunate to spend time with him. I'll always be thankful to Liberation Barbell for hosting him, and Lori, the owner of that gym, for inviting Ed out. And Ed spending time on a Saturday afternoon in a gym with a bunch of people he doesn't know, sharing his knowledge and expertise. I'll always be thankful for those people coming into my lives and allowing me to share it with you guys. So thank you for listening to today's episode. Share this with somebody who's into the strength culture. Share this with somebody who likes to argue on second and third tier issues about this or that, and share it with them, and let them see the simplistic approach that champions take to their training, applying a lot of the principles that I discuss in this episode. So once again, guys, go check out the Advanced Muscle Gains program. If you haven't downloaded my free ebook, go to 23hoursprogram.com/ebook, and you can grab a free copy that discusses that Fit RSVP framework. Like I said, a lot of the stuff that Ed answered people's questions with was in regards to volume and progression and frequency and recovery, which I discuss in terms of muscle gains in that ebook. So go pick up your free copy. If you want to, apply as opposed to reading, and you don't want a digital resource, then you can pick up a copy of the Advanced Muscle Gains program and start a new 10-week training block, applying the Fit RSVP framework into your training and taking action on it. So thank you again for listening to the 23 Hours Podcast. I'm Games with Girds. I'm going to hop off, but you guys enjoy this, share it, and stick around for more episodes on how to optimize your life, your business, your career, and more importantly, your training, and how you can use that 1 hour of training every day as a catalyst for growth in the other 23 hours of your life. Thanks so much, guys. We'll talk to you soon.